Jimmy, I get your initial reaction to Brooks opening that first door for a possible return back to the PGA Tour. What'd you think?
Oh, boy. Well, when he resigned, you were just waiting for this other shoe to drop, Rich. I personally just wish that he had done what he did in applying for reinstatement yesterday before today, because I sat down with Greg Norman for 2 hours in preparation for our show. I did ask him about Brooks, and he was a little bit surprised. But obviously he hadn't filed for reinstatement yet. And you'd be able to see that interview, as you mentioned, 7 a.m. on Tuesday. The Big Swing airs on Golf Channel, 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. Little shameless plug there. But I was just listening to your discussion with Todd, and one of the things that I think is worth noting, Bryson DeChambeau may be a little bit different, and Todd touched on it, because one of the big kind of points of discussion in all of this was the players and their IP, their individual, their intellectual property. And Todd mentioned it, that, Bryson makes millions of dollars on YouTube. The question is, if he comes back to the PGA Tour, and he said that he hasn't signed his new contract yet, but if he comes back to the PGA Tour, are they going to allow him to, continue to do what he does? In the past, that's been an issue. So I think that really bears some watching, and their situations are a little bit different.
These guys they're professionals. They want to make money, as much of it as they possibly can. But it's hard to put your head around, this idea that Bryson, for example, we don't know this for sure, might be comfortable just playing the majors and then, messing around with his YouTube business, which is robust. I mean, what about a legacy? What about winning tournaments that matter? And there are tournaments out there, at least I still feel this way, beyond the major championships that matter. In any event, that commentary aside, Jimmy, let's go. I'm going to go back to Greg Norman. What did Greg have to say about the current state of affairs with the circuit that he just left, Live Golf?
Well, I think it's very much his opinion that here in the United States, we look at this differently than the Saudis do. 50% of the golf courses and growth in the game is occurring a long ways away from here, in places where Live is actually reasonably popular. And it has been a challenge here in the United States. Certainly the ratings haven't been very good, and there's been a lot of criticism of the product itself. But it's thriving in some other places, and the whole idea of this, it depends on who you ask, was to get a foothold in the sport and to create commerce. And so that's still entirely
what does that
possible,
mean, Jimmy? What do you mean create? What does he mean, create commerce?
So there are some people who will tell you that, we did an interview with Tom Friedman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer for the New York Times, who's obviously well-versed in what's going on in the Middle East. And he said that the entire idea in the first place was to create golf as a destination sport in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And, this is the way that they chose to do it. Some dispute as to whether it was a wise strategy, but, golf is growing in a lot of places. And again, this is not my take on it. This is what Norman says. And by the way, what the Saudis have said.
I didn't view the Saudi play, the foray into golf, as, we want people to, get off their sofas in New York and go play golf in Saudi Arabia. I don't, maybe someday, but I don't think that's happening. I always felt
certainly not happening now.
Yeah, I always thought they wanted to diversify from oil, and this was part of a broader strategy to try to get a seat at the table with the masters of the universe who populate the sport of golf. Get a seat, where the folks at Augusta are now sitting. And I think it's proven harder than maybe they initially imagined. I will say, money is money, Jimmy. I mean, you know that. And they have rivers of money. So, is there any sense that the private equity that's currently involved with the PGA Tour is still interested in the Saudi money, even if it's not in the form of, say, a proper league like Live Golf, just that investment?
Remains to be seen. Rich, as we sit here talking, I think the number is 948 days since this framework agreement and still nothing. Now, a lot has changed, obviously, for the PGA Tour, but look, they've had this infusion from SSG. We all know the story. $1.5 billion, as much as $3 billion, and I think that clearly the PGA Tour is going to change, and already seeing it, but it's going to change in a dramatic way. And I think that really we're not going to know the answer to this till a year from now, or maybe more.
Jimmy, you've been covering golf for a long time. What do you think of this idea that's being floated, likely going to be enacted for 2027 and beyond? This idea of scarcity, fewer tournaments, and then likely going to bigger markets.
Listen, it's easy for me to sit here and say this, and I'm not a numbers guy. You know that, Rich. You and I are both story guys, okay? There are some people who do the numbers better than we do. But I do remember something from my Econ 101 class at the University of Maryland. They might have said this on the very first day. If you want to make something more valuable, what do? You don't make more of it. You make less of it. And this is the way that golf used to be. Golf used to be, it would end at the PGA Championship in August, and then there would be 4 months off where these guys would go and play what we used to call the silly season, and then they'd show up again in Hawaii, and the season was renewed. Well, along comes Tiger Woods, and they think it's a good idea to kind of plant a flag in every single week that they can, and that's not a bad strategy because everybody wanted to see that. But I do think that scarcity is a really, really smart idea. You can't just keep, look what happened to tennis. Tennis became not only every weekend, tennis became several competing events every weekend. And now, I would venture to say, although there are probably a lot of people out there who are big tennis fans who might take issue with this, nothing matters but the 4 majors.
Won't someone, though, jump into the void? If there's an off weekend, I think somebody's going to pony up. And if it doesn't have the PGA Tour brand attached to it, how do you think they feel about that?
Well, listen, if you recall, I think there were a lot of people at the time when LIV first launched who were suggesting that maybe the idea should be that the PGA Tour goes back to the kind of model that they're talking about now, January, maybe even February after the Super Bowl is one thing I've heard, but the winter through the end of the summer, and then give the fall to LIV Golf. It's a possibility. I don't know. I get back to one thing, Rich, which is that I think where Brian Rolep is going is really smart. Professional golf in the United States has been pretty much the same for a very long time. Since 1968, for the most part, when, it was part of the PGA of America, the Tournament Players Division, and the PGA Tour itself was actually formed. Hasn't really changed that much. There's been some of these World Golf Championships that were, in response to that initiative that Greg Norman tried to launch with Fox TV. These playoffs, again, an attempt to kind of claim more of the ground. But I think a big change is in the offing. Yeah. And, getting back to real quickly, one of the things that Brooks Koepka is going to be confronting, and I listened with interest to your discussion with Todd, don't forget, the PGA Tour now is not 125 players. It's now 100. And so there are a lot of people out there. I can probably think of 25 people who are not going to want to see him.
Yeah, I think broadly here, the mission for Brian Rolap is to get the best players in the world together roughly 20 times a year and then make it pencil. You're in the business of golf business now with your Big Swing podcast. Make it pencil, because we know that's what the private equity wants. It's what they're all about. Jimmy, thank you. I'll give you one last crack. So Greg Norman, who else is on the docket for you as you launch this podcast?
Well, Greg Norman is going to be our first guest, and that'll be, as I said, on Golf Channel on Tuesday. It was an interesting discussion. Sat down with him for about 2 hours, so it was difficult to cull that all down. Sam Hahn, who created Lab Golf and then sold it for a princely sum. Of course, he got a lot of attention, or their products did, when the U.S. Open was dramatically won with one of their products by J.J. Spaun and also Lucas Glover the year before. A lot of people using Lab Golf products, and it's a very interesting company and story. But Brian Rolap has agreed to come on and try and spend some time with us. Lots of folks, so we got a lot planned. Steph Curry later in the year, too.
We love Steph. And by the way, lots of us who are struggling with our putting are fooling around with that lab putter. We're thinking hard about it. Jimmy, thank you. We appreciate your time. Jimmy Roberts, Big Swing. It's Tuesday morning.